Skulduggery Pleasant, Book 1, Chapter 3, Little Girl All Alone. That afternoon, Stephanie and her mother took the 15-minute drive from Haggard to Gordon's estate. Her mom opened the front door and stepped back. "On over the house goes first," she said with a little smile and a bow, and Stephanie stepped inside. She wasn't thinking this house was her property. The idea was too big, too silly. Even her parents were technically the custodians till she turned 18. How could she own a house? How many other 12-year-old kids owned houses? No, it was too silly an idea. Too far-fetched. Too crazy. Exactly the kind of thing that Gordon would have thought made perfect sense. The house was big and quiet and empty as they walked through it. Everything seemed so new to her now. And Stephanie found herself reacting differently to the furniture and carpets and paintings. Did she like it? Did she agree with this color or that fabric? One thing that had to be said for Gordon: he had a good eye. Stephanie's mother said there was very little she would change if she had to. Some of the paintings were a little too unnerving for her tastes, but on the whole, the furnishings were elegant and understated, exuding an air of distinction that befitted a house of this stature. They hadn't decided what they were going to do with the house. Any decision was left up to Stephanie. But her parents still had the villa to consider. Owning 3 houses between them seemed a bit much. Her father had suggested selling the villa, but her mother hated the idea of getting through a place so idyllic. They had also talked about Stephanie's education, and she knew that conversation was far from over. The moment they had left Mr. Frederick's office, they warned her not to act and to let all this go through her head. Recent events, they had said, should not mean she could stop studying, stop planning for college. She needed to be independent, they said, and she needed to make it on her own. Stephanie had let them talk, and nodded occasionally and muttered an agreement where an agreement was appropriate. She didn't bother to explain that she needed college. She needed to find her own way in the world, because she knew that if she didn't, she would never escape Haggard. She wasn't about to throw her future away simply because she had come into some money. She and her mother spent so long looking around the ground floor that by the time they got to the bottom of the stairs, it was already 5 o'clock. With their exploring done for the day, they locked up and went to the car. The first few drops of rain splashed against the windscreen as they got in. Stephanie clicked her seatbelt closed, and her mother turned the key in the ignition. The car spluttered a bit, groaned a little, and then shut up altogether. Stephanie's mother looked at her. "Uh-oh." They both got out and opened the doors. "Well," her mother said, looking at the engine, "at least that's still there." "Do you know anything about engines?" Stephanie said. "That's why I have a husband, so I don't have to. Engines and shelves, that's why man was invented." Stephanie made a mental note to learn about engines before he turned 18. She wasn't too fussed about the shelves. Her mom dug her mobile phone out of her bag and called Stephanie's dad, but he was too busy on site and there's no way he could get to them before the nightfall. They went back inside the house, and her mother called a mechanic, and they spent 3/4 of an hour waiting for him to arrive. The sky was gray and angry, and the rain was falling hard by the time the truck appeared around the corner. It splashed through puddles and on its way up the long drive. Stephanie's mom pulled her jacket up over her head and ran out to meet it. Stephanie could see a great big dog in the cab of the truck, looking on as the mechanic got out to examine their car. After a few minutes, her mother came back inside, thoroughly drenched. "He can't fix it here," she said, wringing out her jacket on the porch, "so he's going to tow it to the garage. It shouldn't take too long to fix. There'll be room for both of us in the truck. You can sit on my knee, Mom, or I can sit on your knee, whatever works." "Can I stay here?" Her mother looked at her. "On your own? Please? You said it wouldn't take long, and I'd like to have another look around just on my own." "I don't know, Steph. Please? I've stayed on my own before. I won't bring anything, I swear." Her mother laughed. "Okay, fine. I shouldn't be any more than an hour, all right? An hour and a half at the most." Her mother gave her a quick kiss on the cheek. "Call me if you need anything." She ran back outside and jumped in the cab next to the dog, who proceeded to slobber all over her face. Stephanie watched the car being towed off into the distance, and it vanished from sight. She did a little bit more exploring, now that she was on her own. She climbed up the stairs and went straight to Gordon's study. His publisher, Seamus T. Steep of Art-like Books, had phoned them earlier that day, passing on his condolences and inquiring about the state of Gordon's last book. Her mother had told him that they'd find out if Gordon had completed it, and if they had, they'd send it on. Mr. Steep was very keen to get the book on the shelves, certain that it would crash onto the bestseller list and stay there for a long time. "Dead writers sell," he said, like he approved of Gordon's clever marketing ploy. Stephanie opened the desk drawer and found the manuscript in a neat stack. She pulled it out carefully and laid it on the desktop, careful not to smudge the paper. The first page held the title, and nothing more, in bold lettering. "And the darkness rained upon them." The manuscript was thick and heavy, like all of Gordon's books. She'd read most of them, and the odd splash of pretension aside, she had quite enjoyed his work. His stories tended to be about people who could do astonishing and wonderful things, and the strange and terrible events that inevitably led up to their bizarre and horrible deaths. She knows the way he would set up a strong and noble hero, and then over the course of the book, systematically subject this hero to brutal punishment in a bid to strip all his arrogance and certainty, so that, by the end, he was humbled and had learned a great lesson. And then Gordon killed him off, usually in the most dignified way possible. Stephanie could almost hear Gordon laughing with mischievous glee as she read. She lifted the title page and carefully laid it down, face down on the desk beside the manuscript. She started reading. She didn't mean to spend long at it, but soon she was devouring every word, oblivious to the creaking old house and the rain outside. Her mobile phone rang, making her jump. She'd been reading for 2 hours. She pressed the answer button and held it to her ear. "Hi, sweetie," came her mother's voice. "Everything okay?" "Yes," Stephanie answered. "Just reading." "You're not reading one of Gordon's books, are you, Steph?" "He writes about horrible monsters and scary stuff and bad people doing worse things. It'll give you nightmares." "No, Mom, I'm reading the dictionary." Even the brief silence from the other end of the phone was skeptical. "The dictionary?" her mother said. "Really?" "Yeah," Stephanie said. "Do you know that popple is a word?" "You are stranger than you father. You didn't know that?" "I suspected as much. So is the car fixed yet?" "No, and that's why I'm calling. They can't get it going and the road up to you is flooded. So I'm going to get a taxi up as far as I'll go and then see if I can find some way around on foot. It's going to be another 2 hours at least." Stephanie sensed an opportunity. Ever since she was a child, she had much preferred her own company to the company of others. It occurred to her that she had never spent a whole night without her parents nearby. A small taste of freedom, it almost tingled on her tongue. "Mom, it's fine. You don't have to. I'm okay here." "There's no way I'm leaving you in a strange house by yourself." "It's not a strange house. It's Gordon's, and I'm fine. There's no point in you trying to get here tonight. It's slashing rain." "Sweetie, it won't take me long." "It'll take you ages. Where is it flooded?" Her mother paused. "At the bridge?" "The bridge? I want to walk from the bridge to here. If I speed walk..." "Mom, don't be silly. Get Dad to pick you up." "Sweetheart, are you sure? I like it here. Really, okay?" "Well, okay," her mother said reluctantly. "I'll be over first thing in the morning to pick you up, alright? I saw some food in the cupboard, so if you're hungry and make yourself something." "Okay, I'll see you tomorrow then. Call us if you need anything, or if you just want some company." "I will. Night, Mom. I love you." "I know." Stephanie hung up and grinned. She slipped the phone back into her jacket and put her feet up on the desk, relaxing back into the chair and went back to reading. She looked up again, and she was surprised to find that it was almost midnight and the rain had stopped. If she were home right now, she'd be in bed. She blinked, her eyes sore, stood up from the desk, and went downstairs to the kitchen. For all his wealth and success and extravagant taste, she was thankful that when it came to food, Gordon was a pretty standard guy. The bread was stale and the fruit was a bit too ripe. There were biscuits, and there was cereal, and the milk in the fridge was still good for one more day. Stephanie made herself a snack and wandered down to the living room, where she flicked on the TV. She sat on the couch and was just getting comfy when the phone rang. She looked at it, resting there on the table at her elbow. Who would be calling? Anyone who knew Gordon had died wouldn't be calling because they'd know he had died. And she didn't really want to be the one to tell anyone who didn't know. It could be her parents, but then why wouldn't they just call her mobile? Feeling that as the new owner of the house, it was her responsibility to answer her own phone, Stephanie picked it up and held it to her ear. "Hello?" Silence. "Hello?" Stephanie repeated. "Who is this?" came a man's voice. "I'm sorry," Stephanie said. "Who do you want to speak to?" "Who is this?" responded the voice, more irritably this time. "If you're looking for Gordon Edgley," Stephanie said, "I'm afraid that he's..." "I know Edgley's dead," snapped the man. "Who are you? Your name?" Stephanie hesitated. "Why do you want to know?" she asked. "What are you doing in that house? Why are you at his house?" "If you want to call back to my..." "I don't want to, all right? Listen to me, girlie. If you mess up my master's plans, he'll be very displeased, and he's not the man you want to displease. You got that? Now tell me who you are." Stephanie realized her hands were shaking. She forced herself to calm down and quickly found anger replacing her nervousness. "My name is none of your business," she said. "If you want to talk to someone, call back tomorrow at a reasonable hour." "You don't talk to me like that," the man hissed. "Good night," Stephanie said firmly. "You do not talk to me like..." But Stephanie had already putting down the phone. Suddenly the idea of spending a whole night in here wasn't as appealing as she first sounded. She considered calling her parents and scolded herself for being so childish. No need to worry them. No, she thought to herself. No need to worry them about just someone patting on the door. "Open up!" came the man's voice between the pounding. Stephanie got to her feet, staring through the hall behind the living room. She could see a dark shape behind the frosted glass around the front door. "Open the damn door!" Stephanie backed up to the fireplace, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew she was in there. There was no use pretending that she wasn't. But maybe if she stayed really, really quiet, he'd give up and go away. She heard him cursing, and the pounding grew so heavy that the front door allowed her under the blows. "Leave me alone!" Stephanie shouted. "Open the door!" "No!" she shouted back. She liked shouting. It disguised her fear. "I'm calling the police! I'm calling the police right now!" The pounding stopped immediately, and Stephanie saw the shape move away from the door. Was that it? Had you scared him away? She saw the back door. Was it locked? Of course it was locked. It had to be locked. But she wasn't sure. She wasn't certain. She grabbed a poker from the fireplace and was reaching for her phone when she heard a knock on the window beside her. She cried out and jumped back. The curtains were open, and outside the window was pitch black. She couldn't see a thing. "Are you alone in there?" came the voice. It was teasing now, playing with her. "Go away!" she said loudly, holding up the poker so she could see it. She heard the man laugh. "What are you going to do with that?" he asked. "I'll break your head open with it!" Stephanie screamed, as her fear and fury bubbling inside her. She heard him laugh again. "I just want to come in," he said. "Open the door for me, girlie. Let me come in." "The police are on their way," she said. "You're a liar." She could see nothing beyond the glass, but he could see everything. She moved to the phone, snatching it from its cradle. "Don't do that," came the voice. "I'm calling the police." "The road's closed, girlie." "You call them? I'll break down that door and kill you hours before they get here." Fear became terror, and Stephanie froze. She was going to cry. She could feel it, tears welling up inside her. She hadn't cried in years. "What do you want?" she said to the darkness. "Why do you want to come in?" "It's got nothing to do with me, girlie. I've just been sent to pick something up. Let me in. I'll look around, get what I came here for, and leave. I won't harm a pretty little hair on your pretty little head. I promise. Now you just open that door right this second." Stephanie gripped the poker in both hands and shook her head. She was crying now, tears rolling down her cheeks. "No!" she said. She screamed as a fish smashed through the window, showering her the carpet with glass. She stumbled back as the man started climbing in, glaring at her with blazing eyes, unmindful of the glass that cut into him. The moment his foot touched the floor inside the house, Stephanie was bolting out of the room, over to the front door, fumbling at the lock. Strong hands grabbed her from behind. She screamed again as she lifted off her feet and carried back. She kicked out, slamming the heel into his shin. The man grunted and let go, and Stephanie twisted, trying to swing under the poker into his face, but he caught it and pulled it from her grasp. One hand went to her throat, and Stephanie gagged, unable to breathe as the man forced her into the living room. He pushed her into an armchair and leaned over her, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't break his grip. "Now then," the man said, his face contorting into a sneer. "Why don't you give me the key, girlie?" And that's when the front door was flung off its hinges and Skulduggery Pleasant burst into the house. The man cursed and released Stephanie and swung the poker, but Skulduggery moved straight into him and hit him so hard that Stephanie thought the man's head might come off. He hit the ground and tumbled backwards, but rolled to his feet as Skulduggery moved in. The man launched himself forward. They both collided and went back towards the couch, and Skulduggery lost his hat. Stephanie saw a flash of white under the scarf. They got to their feet, grappling, and the man swung a punch that knocked Skulduggery's sunglasses to the other side of the room. Skulduggery responded by moving in low, grabbing the man around the waist and twisting his hip into him. The man was flipped onto the floor, hard. He cursed a little more, then remembered Stephanie and made for her. Stephanie leaped out of the chair, but before he could reach her, Skulduggery was there, kicking the man's legs out from under him. The man hit a small coffee table with his chin and howled in pain. "You think you can stop me?" he screamed as he tried to stand. His knees seemed shaky. "Do you know who I am?" "Haven't the foggiest," Skulduggery said. The man spilled blood and grinned defiantly. "Well, I know about you," he said. "My master told you all about you, detective. And you're going to have to do a lot more than that to stop me." Skulduggery shrugged, and Stephanie watched in amazement as a ball of fire flared up in his hand, and he hurled it at the man who was suddenly covered in flame. But instead of screaming, the man tilted his head back and roared with laughter. The fire may have engulfed him, but it wasn't hurting him. "More!" he laughed. "Give me more!" "If you insist." And then Skulduggery took an old-fashioned revolver from his jacket and fired the gun bucking slightly with the recoil. The bullet hit the man in the shoulder, and he screamed, then tried to run, and tripped. He scrambled for the doorway, ducking and dodging lest he got shot again, the flames obscuring his vision so much that he hit a wall on his way out. And then he was gone. Stephanie stared at the door, trying to make something impossible. "Well," Skulduggery said, "that's something you don't see every day." She turned. When his hat came off, his hair had come off with too. In all the confusion, all she had seen was a chalk-white scalp. So she turned, expecting to see a bald albino maybe. But no. With the sunglasses gone and the scarf hanging down, there was no denying the fact that he had no flesh. He had no skin. He had no eyes and he had no face. All he had was a skull for a head.